So hi everyone, thanks very much for joining us here tonight at this live webinar. We've got a fantastic guest. I'm Phil Kelly. I'm from an organisation called Pronoctis. We're human performance specialists and we work actually across 25 different NHS trusts. So a lot of our customers, clients are feeling the pain that you are today. And I do see it firsthand. I coach a lot of executives within NHS, so I do feel your pain. And hopefully tonight we'll be able to take your mind off into a different space, a different ether, and we can, utilize this massive brain of our first guest tonight. I think before we get into tonight's guest, it's really important that I remind you of this is one of 4 of a series. So tomorrow night, we got a great chat with Beth Tweddle, a GB gymnast, fantastic athlete, performed at the highest level. There'll be a fantastic chat with her in terms of dealing with pressure. On Thursday, we've got a fantastic speaker in Andy from the ex-Royal Marines, which is from Liverpool way. If you haven't seen him before, he's great. And then on Friday, we have got some energy come into the room with Locksmith from Rudimental. That's about 5 p.m. on Friday, so do please come and join us. But that's enough about them. Go and register if you've seen them. I know you've got emails. Tonight, what a guest we've got, Professor Greg Whyte. Greg, how the devil are you?
I'm very well, mate. Great to be here, actually.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. We've got to share it. It's fantastic for us to be able to help and support as best we can the NHS during these trying times, isn't it?
100%. I mean, the job that the NHS is doing is absolutely incredible. Frankly, has always been incredible, but I think the spotlight has really been shone on it during this period. And I think, we see that with clapping on the doorstep and the recognition of the work they're doing. And without them, we'd be in a much darker place than we currently are.
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt about that. The thing I was thinking is in terms of how fantastic it's been for the trust to provide an opportunity and to provide a setting like this tonight for them to come together and to provide a level of support.
I think, what that speaks to really is community. And I think certainly one of the things that many of us are struggling with is actually that social context. I think what's interesting now, actually, if you'd have asked people, 12 months ago, what they thought about doing Zoom meetings or team meetings or whatever it was, it was a completely alien concept, but now it's become very much sort of run of the mill. But to my mind, it's been really important because it is that social contact is absolutely crucial during these times, particularly for mental and emotional health, but also the social health, which we don't often talk about, but actually we are incredibly social animals. And so having the ability to touch base with people, and I think crucially as well to be able to see people, really does make a difference to our day-to-day living.
Yeah, and I think especially during the phases of lockdown, I think it's that variety of the type of people. I mean, look at the NHS, the guys on the front line are able to go out there and work with their colleagues to a certain degree, although there's massive barriers to communication there. And they're coming back and then it's just the immediate family. Whereas maybe their release was a friend before or a colleague from a previous job or, somebody else that they would go for a social side. That's missing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's that almost incidental relationships, where you walk down the high street and see somebody you hadn't seen for some time, or you're having a cup of coffee and you bump into an old mate. And I think we definitely miss that. It's become a little bit more formulaic now because obviously you have to organize things, so you have to make sure that people are on calls and that they're free at the time and all that sort of stuff. But equally, I think what telephone did for humans, now Zoom and Teams and etc. have sort of taken up that mantle and just taking it that little extra level where we can spend time just chatting. And I think actually that eye-to-eye contact, speaking to people, has been really, really important. But I'm sure many of us can't wait to get back to a time when we can actually sit down and be in the physical presence of other people.
Yeah, definitely. So the theme for tonight is obviously teamwork, leadership, and motivation, especially during times of lockdown. So those 3 things there, Greg. So teamwork, leadership, motivation. What jumps out at you when those 3 are put together?
Wow. They are integral to success. I mean, all this is coined around success, I think. And I think that often it's one of those things that they've become almost such common parlance that they almost become a little bit trite. But I think still we struggle to understand, what does leadership mean? And actually, what does good leadership look like? I think equally, what is teamwork? And I think sometimes, particularly, this is a great example where all of a sudden, during this pandemic, we've been forced into teams which aren't necessarily our normal fit. And so this idea of team selection and then making the team operate together has been really highlighted during this period, because all of a sudden we're being pushed into teams which are alien to us. We haven't had time to migrate into that. So I think that is absolutely crucial. So I think, and again, if we can get those bits right, success tends to follow on from that as we even under things like stressful situations, that we can actually get through as long as we've got that right team environment with the right leadership.
Yeah. So with all the organizations, individuals that you've worked with, what were some of the key characteristics of successful leadership? What are the key things that, people on this call could take away and think, right, I've got that one, maybe I need to develop that one?
Well, I think, leadership's an interesting one. I think leadership's a very lonely place to be, I think, in general. I've led, so if we take comic relief and sport relief, for example, I've led 32 challenges. And there are two things that I recognize through that process. The first is that it's always my fault. Usually only the bad stuff. Good. You rarely get thanked for the good stuff, but you certainly get a finger pointed when you do things badly. And so I think you've got to, as a leader, you've got to have very broad shoulders. You've got to be able to cope with that. And I think that's important. I think that the second thing, to my mind, as being a good leader, is that to some extent, great leaders are invisible. It's not about the leader. It's not about them as individuals. It's actually about making sure that their team operate at 100%. And I think crucial to that is actually about making sure the entire team operates to 100%. Some of the things that I've learned a lot about is that, particularly in diverse teams, when you've got lots of different people doing lots of different things, that I think sometimes what you can do is you can layer on your own sense of hierarchy into that environment, and you can put priority on certain members of the team and not on others, whereas actually every member of that team is as important as everybody else. And optimizing their performance. If you the analogy is thinking about it as a clock, is that everybody's got a cog. Some people's cogs are bigger than others, but the bottom line is the clock won't work unless all of those cogs are working in unison. So I think what's crucial is that what you're trying to do as a leader is make sure that everybody in your team is pushing in the same direction and is optimized to work at 100%. Not an easy task, but certainly what we should be aiming for.
But a lot of that starts with the leader themselves, doesn't it? I mean, and a lot of those things are, understanding your natural style of leadership, whether that's a right fit for what you're trying to achieve at the time, but also understanding the type of leader you want to be.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't match up, do they? Sometimes you have to do things that maybe you're not comfortable doing, and likewise, sometimes you shouldn't do things that you're not comfortable with.
I think it's a great, to give it a sporting analogy, there was a penchant just recently for golf. For everybody had to, at the time, it was Tiger Woods. You had to play like Tiger Woods. Well, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? if you had the skill of that man to be able to play like he does. But I think one of the things you always have to remember on that, as I try to explain to people, is that he plays the way he does because of his innate ability. His biomechanics, his muscle fiber typing, his power production, all of those things underpin the way in which he plays. And I think what you have to be very careful of is to try and emulate that by replication. Because in general, and I think leadership is the same, it's not about actually replicating other leaders. It's about taking the best bits of them and making them work for you in the style that fits you. So that in the golfing analogy, what you're looking for is dissecting performance down, taking those elements of performance which are valuable, which you can then replicate as part of your own structure. And I think that's the key to leadership.
Yeah, a lot of what you said resonates there with me. What I see sometimes in leaders, well, a lot of the time, to be fair, is that when you say, well, what's your leadership style? What's what you're trying to be, what you're trying to do? If I was to say, write it down, people really, really struggle sometimes. So that means then that they're subconsciously replaying some of the leadership traits that they've seen by their leaders as they were developed. Yeah. And they don't always think, well, actually, that was a really good skill. I'm having that toolbox, or I didn't like that one, so I'm definitely putting that in my negative toolbox. That doesn't resonate with me. There's not that natural filtering process. It's very much of, well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing because I've been promoted for it or I've been rewarded for it. So, let's not change anything.
Yeah. And evolution is absolutely fundamental. I generally bring it back to sporting and exercise analogies. But if you think about, junior athletes into senior athletes, what you did to be successful as a junior athlete, it will inform what you do as a senior athlete. But you have got to adapt. You've got to mold your approach in order to be successful. Because what you're doing is you're taking yourself into a different environment, albeit it may be the same sport, albeit it may be the same business, but actually what's in front of you has changed, and so therefore you have to be able to evolve from that point. What you can't do is do the same thing consistently throughout a career. As you move up the ladder, you have to be able to evolve to be able to deliver optimally each of those levels.
Yeah, I'm reading. I'm just a reading tip for anybody if there's into reading. Goldsmith's book, what got you here won't get you there. That's
Yeah,
basically, you haven't really got to read the book. It's in the title.
That's
it's as one of the most successful leadership consultants in the world, especially all around the big New York Stock Exchange 50 companies. That's what he does. He goes in and goes, right, you've got this far. What have we got to do differently to get a different result? Now you're further up. Because that has a massive impact on the followership, doesn't it? The style of leadership directly affects the followership.
I think it does, and I think one thing we did sort of mention around leadership is I think empathy is absolutely crucial. Is that what you've got to do is you've got to feel the people around you in the sense that you've got to understand what makes them tick. I think one of the things that I've learned across going back to sport relief and comic relief, I've worked with over 100 celebrities on those events. And the one thing is that how you motivate an individual is entirely different for all 100 of them. There might be nuances which are similar, but fundamentally everybody has a different set of values and a different way in which they need to be motivated in order to function optimally. And I think it's absolutely crucial that you do understand your team well and understand what makes your team tick in order to make sure they perform.
Yeah, and you can only do that by spending time and communicating with and connecting with your staff and your colleagues.
Yeah.
Because I think that massively leads into an area that I'm a big fan of, and it's a real simple one. Again, is situational leadership. It's situational leadership. The principle of that is just because I'm the most senior person in the room doesn't mean I'm in charge. It means the best person with the best experience at that time should be taking the lead.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's just interesting because I spent an afternoon on calls. I'm working with a young lady who's attempting to break the world record for rowing across the Atlantic solo on her own. And she's going to be out there for about 35 days alone in some of the most frightening seas on the planet. So that takes some go. But I think what's interesting about that is we've got a fairly large team around it. I tend to coordinate that team, but you're absolutely right. When we're talking about specific areas, so we've got a sleep scientist, for example, who works with us. When we're talking about sleep, I won't lead on that because the person with the intelligence and the brain and the expertise and the experience on sleep is sat in the room with us. Why would I take the lead on that? And I think, again, the leadership role recognizes that breadth of experience and expertise and then calls on it. And so I think you're right. It's not. It absolutely isn't about being the most important person in the room, because actually the best leaders that I've seen are those that they can bring the right team together. I mean, they're great analogies in sport for this. Who on the surface they don't look like particularly competent leaders, but then what they do is that they bring the right people around them, and those people deliver for them, and that is a skill in itself. But the key to that is you've got to give people their space in order to be able to develop and to deliver.
Yeah, and obviously there's a responsibility on the organization to provide the opportunities to develop as well and invest in your leadership journey as well. You said a word earlier, Greg, that really resonates with me as a leader is empathy. You can only really have empathy with people when you understand what they're going through, or you even know what they're going through. I think a lot of our conversations and communications now are a bit transactional. It's, how are you doing? How's the weather? Great, let's go back to work. Where as human beings, we need that deeper connection, not with everybody. And I always say this, the world's not paradise. We're not going to get on with everybody in the workplace. We're not going to have matching values, and we're not going to go on holiday and have a beer together on a Friday, But if we go into work with that sort of open mind, then we're setting up that opportunity for us to all to be empathetic towards one another.
Yeah. And I think part of that, I think what always strikes me is that I think you should always lead by example. And again, it's one of those sort of sayings that becomes a bit trite, really. What does that mean? But I think actually leading by example is absolutely crucial. And to that end, you don't need to be a specialist in a particular area for somebody to have respect for you. Is that the respect is built from what you have achieved. In other words, respect is built from what you have done, but it's also about what you do. And I don't think that you can just assume because you have risen to a particular position on that sort of hierarchical ladder to assume that people will respect you just because you happen to hold the highest perch.
Yeah.
I still think that there is work to be done to demonstrate. I mean, I do it all the time. People often say to me, "Why am I?" Actually, it was 3 years ago to this week with the Beast of the East. I was out on the bike with Greg James, and it was, at one point, it was with wind chill. It was -30. And believe you me, I could have done with sitting in the van. I didn't want to be on the road. But critically on that is that there's lots of things that are built around that. But number one is about respect, is that I'm out there on with him on the road, understanding exactly what's going on. Critical to that as well is that when you're that close to the action, it means that you make better decisions. It's very difficult to make rapid decisions when you're sat in a vehicle 200 yards behind the action. So I think leading by example is really important.
Yeah, and what you've touched on there actually is a whole other sort of concept and theories around human factors, which I know is huge in the NHS. It has been in a lot of safety critical industries. And we talk a lot about how can you make an informed decision if you haven't got that situational awareness? Because if you haven't got that knowledge of what's going on, you're making a decision from afar. There's always going to be a disconnect, whether it's from geographically distance or miscommunication or Chinese whispers happening. You need to, or you delegate decision making further down.
Yeah. And again, that brings us back to this concept of trust, though, because I think that you can allow others to assist you in making that decision if you are sort of geographically dislocated or etc. But it does come down to trust, and to my mind, I think it's always the issue is that, look, don't ask the question if you don't want the answer. If you've made your mind up of what the action is going to be, then don't pretend that you're doing some sort of canvassing and trying to pick up what's going on and get a feel for it if it's not going to make any difference to your decision making. I think the key is that it comes down to making sure that you've got the right team around you, and then it's about making sure that you're asking the right people the right questions in the right way, and then you are trusting that answer and taking actions based upon that.
Yeah, trust is huge. Trust is so important for any team to perform, isn't it? And looking at that, each team is made up of an individual, and we can only imagine what the people on the call have been through for, let's face it, 12 months. And it's been going longer than that. I've said this on every call I've had probably the last 12 months, and I keep saying the same thing, is that a lot of our staff, a lot of our people were burnt out and stressed before COVID. We were overworking, overcommitting, burning the candle both ends. We're constantly on our phones. We're always giving, and we're never recharging the batteries. I think a lot of the questions around tonight, especially with you being on, is that how do I motivate myself to do some exercise? How do I look after myself for me is the question, when I'm already doing 12, 14, 16-hour shifts 7 days a week. And I think it comes back to that element, I think, of self-regard and allowing yourself to be first, putting yourself first, to allow yourself to recharge your batteries on whatever that is you do to recharge your batteries, to enable you to go and help and support other people more.
You're absolutely right. And I think what's interesting on that is it's almost like how we ask ourselves the question. Because it's like, can I afford to take an hour off? Having done a 12-hour shift and I've got to go into the family, can I afford to take an hour off because I've got other priorities? But rather than ask it in that fashion, actually just turn that question around and say, what will be the value of taking 30 minutes to do some physical activity? And will it enhance everything else that I am doing? So will it enhance my productivity at work? Will it enhance my productivity at home with the family? Will it improve my sleep quality? All of those things. And I think what you then start to create is a reason to, rather than a reason not to. Because I think finding a reason not to is relatively simple, particularly when you're incredibly busy, like all the teams are in the NHS. I think what you've got to do is turn it on its head and actually ask yourself about the value of doing it, firstly. Because what we do know is that fundamentally physical activity incredibly important for both physical health, but also mental, emotional, and social health. But that mental, emotional piece is really important, particularly for those that are chronically stressed. So there are obvious reasons to do it. I think behind that, what we know is that people who are physically active are more productive. They are more alert. They have lower levels of lethargy. What we know is it significantly impacts on mood. So things like anger and fatigue fall where things, positive mood traits actually start to rise. So, you know, there's a real value in that physical activity for it. And I think when it comes to the physical activity itself, I think often what we are is we are bounded by process, is that we think, oh, I've got to put my shoes on, I've got to get changed, I've got to go out the door, it's raining, you know, and it's dark, and so it's process driven. And the problem is, because there's so much process, eventually what you do is you start ticking these negative boxes constantly, and eventually you think, oh, I can't be bothered. Whereas what you should do is focus on outcome. So we know what it's like. You go out for a 30-minute walk and you come back and you just feel so much better. You know, you feel much more positive, you feel happier, you've if it's with the family, you've integrated with the family, you chatted with the family for the first time that day. All of those things are positive. So instead of thinking about the process of, I've got to get the shoes on, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've only got enough time to fit this in, just think to yourself, if I go out, when I finish this, I will feel $1 million, I'll feel 100% again, and so therefore it's worth going out. And I think if we sort of, I mean, we talk an awful lot about things like positive self-talk and those things, but I think actually there's a value to that in our own lives. We talk about it in high performance sport, but actually in our own lives there's quite a value to that. So it's just reframing the question in a way that you come out with a positive answer, which then drives a positive outcome.
One of the preventative things we do as coaches, Greg, is we ask people to identify when that negative self-talk starts. And is it, you know, I've got half an hour left of my shift, or I've just finished my shift, I've got to do my handover, and then I'm in the car, oh my God, it's getting late already, or oh my God, I've had a busy shift and my legs are aching, or, you know, that negative self-talk, because then it's a vicious circle / spiral then, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think if we can nip it in the bud straight away and be positive, exactly what you said, and even not have a memory, you know, stored in your mind of, I remember that walk, that workout I did, that run when we could swim, you know, a few days before. I remember how good I felt. Just keep that memory at the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, absolutely right. And they're the experiences that you want to keep hold of. And it is, you know, we've seen it. I mean, what's interesting to me through this entire process, I was talking to a former director of public health earlier today, actually. And I was saying, you know, in the 3 decades I've spent in this discipline, I have never heard the word exercise mentioned so many times and in such a positive light. And I think certainly one of the things that we have learned is the importance of physical activity. Much like anything in life, is when you feel like you're being forced to do it, there are negative connotations to it. Now we're in an environment where we're limited and we're restricted in what we can do. All of a sudden we want it's like kids, you know, we want to do it because we're not allowed to do it, you know. But equally, I think what it's done is it's shone a spotlight on the importance of movement. And really what we are talking about here is moving. We're not, you know, you don't need spandex, you don't need an expensive gym membership, you don't have to run a marathon. You know, it's being more active more often. And that really is the key to it.
Getting that stimulation. I must confess, I mean, since this lockdown, what I've personally done more is, probably driven by the fact I've got a puppy, is that I'm walking twice a day, 30, 40 minutes, but I leave my phone at home because I do find that maybe, you know, I walk out, get to the local park, and then I'll check it. And it's basically, I'm not breaking the psychological state of when I'm actually working.
Yeah.
You know, so little things like that can really make a massive difference. Or if you do have to take it for emergencies, put a podcast on, or put your favorite music on, or just, you know, just put yourself in a completely different place. Otherwise, everything's from a psychological perspective, thinking about work.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And it's interesting because of late we have coined this idea of mindfulness, and we talk an awful lot more about, you know, I mean, back in the 80s, if you spoke about meditation, you know, you'd get a completely different view of what sort of person you were talking to when they mentioned that. But things like yoga and meditation, even things like Pilates, you know, to some extent, what we are doing with exercise is we're creating that opportunity for escape. You know, and for me, certainly what we do know from the research is that if we take that exercise into the great outdoors, all of those benefits that we get from physical activity are heightened. And so I think one of the primary reasons for that is because it just creates greater opportunity to look elsewhere, to give us that space just to be able to offload the mind, and to be a little bit more mindful, as what we've sort of coined it as nowadays. So I think that you're absolutely right. There is a real value to that, is that what we want to do is dissociate ourselves from from the rigors of normal life, and being purposeful with that time. So exercise is doing something with that time. And I think, what you describe about listening to a podcast, it's purposeful actions which give you that ability to escape. And I think that they're really important.
And I think it enriches the experience as well, which means you're more likely to do it again and repeat it.
Absolutely,
that's
right.
For sure. What I see when I personally don't do yoga and things like that, but it's a lot of it seems to be, around this language of being more present, being centered, being grounded. These are the sort of almost spiritual terms, but actually I think, that simple one of just being present more, rather than letting your mind wander off about something else that might be happening. And we've all been there. Family sat down, it's my unwind time to chillax. Netflix is on, but I'm on my phone. We're not even watching the program together. It seems to be every household at the minute. that being even dinner time, keeping your phones out. I remember being a kid. Wowzers, could we not have the telly on when we're having dinner? My dad, wowzers, that just wouldn't happen. But, some days, because I think we've got an addiction to information as well, which the phones don't help. We want to know, we want to know now. We want to know what's going on.
We are, and I think we, to some extent, we think too much. And I think often we think about the wrong thing. I mean, here's a great analogy, is that I remember when I trained David Walliams to swim across the English Channel, 19.8 miles point to point, water temperature 14 degrees centigrade. It's like a cold bath that's constantly being filled with cold water. Water comes out of the tap about 11, 12 degrees. And it's for David, it was 10.5 hour swim, and you get sort of halfway across. And I think interestingly, the analogy is where we are currently, is that the first quarter of this challenge, of the pandemic challenge, was new and exciting is not the right word, but it was challenging in a new way, and so therefore you get onto it. As we reach what is now the final quarter, is that people are starting to see the end, and so actually the sort of motivation that is being generated because we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. What's interesting, I think, that we're just coming towards the end of, is this middle ground, and there's the difficulty, there's the difficult period, because it's at that point that you do think to yourself, I'm really tired, I can't go on, how much further is it, how cold is it, and etc. The sort of list goes on. But I do remember what I would do is I would just simply ask David, and we split the swim down into 30-minute portions. And so every 30 minutes, we stopped for 30 seconds. And in that 30 seconds, he got to eat something and drink something. There was a bottle on a rope, which was thrown from the boat. And there was a cup on the end of a stick with something to eat in it. So we got 30 seconds respite every 30 minutes. And my question to him was never, can you swim, can you finish this? We've got 16 miles to go. Can you make 16 miles? A pointless question to ask yourself in those environments. All I would say to him is, you can make another 30 minutes, can't you? All you got to do is swim for another 30 minutes. All right, don't think about anything else. And I think often what it allows us to do is to partition what we're trying to achieve. And I think often, going back to what you were talking about, is that we're full of so much information and so much stimulus, that often what we need to do is just basically take that and park 95% of that stimulus and just focus on one thing. And in that analogy, the focus was on 30 minutes. Forget everything else. Let's not talk about how cold it is or how tired you are, how much further we got to go, or what the weather's doing. All you've got to think about is one thing, 30 minutes. And I think what exercise often gives us that, it gives us that ability just to, you go out the front door, this is the route I'm going to take, and you focus on the route rather than focusing on everything else that you've left behind.
Yeah, no, it resonates with me. It's the old classic, how do you eat an elephant, isn't it? It's just,
that's right.
It's one bite at a time. And once we've got this, especially at the moment, because it's so frustrating for everybody, because we don't know when it's going to end. So it's almost like, even if we get that horizon fallacy of, well, it's going to be March, it's going to be April, it's going to be June, it's going to be September, it's almost like setting ourselves up for failure, isn't it? And I think that, as you say, as you were talking there about breaking David's swim down for 30 minutes, I was thinking for the guy who's on the call of, right, let's just deal with this patient. Let's just get through today. Let's just get through this morning. Let's do this one step at a time, and we're a step closer towards the end. And certainly my time in the military, when we were going out on operations, it was very much of, it is a 30, 60 minute bite-sized chunks. That's all you can do. That's all you can have control over, rather than and wondering that, I'm not going home for 6 months, because that'll be the longest 6 months of your life.
Yeah. And of course, on that, what you do is, I mean, to some extent, what that is it's short-term goal setting. And the great thing about short-term goal setting, whether it's in a work sense or whether it's in a sports sense or a family sense, is that what you get is you get a much more prevalent opportunity to celebrate success. So if you set those goals appropriately, and that albeit challenging, they are achievable, what you are doing constantly is you're constantly positively affirming your work, your exercise, your actions, because you are reaching your goals on a regular basis. So, can you make 30 minutes? Well, we swim 30 minutes. Great job. You just made 30 minutes. Fantastic. And so now what we're doing is we've got a constant positive affirmation of our performance. Instead of thinking, oh, another 6 hours to go, there's no way I can make 6 hours. You'll not know that until 6 hours time. And so it's almost a pointless, it's not almost, it is a pointless goal, a pointless target to have. Break them down, make them short-term goals, and then make sure that you celebrate the success and reaching those short-term goals on the way through.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely resonates. I'm sure it does with the guys as well. Last little topic I want to talk about before we open the floor for questions. And there's a lot of things, even you were talking there about motivation, and naturally as human beings, motivation comes and goes. I want to have a discussion with you about motivation or commitment, because they're two very different things, but they get overlapped sometimes. So I'll if I can play you what my understanding is, and the way sort of I work with those two words is, motivation will come and go because we're human beings, and some days we don't sleep well, we haven't ate well, the kids are playing up, childcare crashes, I'm working 14-hour days, I'm absolutely exhausted. My motivation today is not going to be the highest, but I'm committed to my goal of providing the best possible service to our patients. The commitment, when you're dedicated, and everybody I've ever worked with in NHS is dedicated and committed, otherwise they wouldn't join that profession. What we don't allow for sometimes is that our motivation cannot always be at 100%, and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you put that, because I think it's probably the one fallacy of motivation is that you are motivated all of the time, which is utterly erroneous. It perturbates and it rises and it falls on a continual basis. And so I think what's crucial is the expectation shouldn't be for a constantly motivated environment or people. And actually, as a leader, you shouldn't expect everybody in your team to be motivated constantly. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work like that. So I think, but by accepting the perturbations in that motivation, actually that makes it more acceptable and makes it easier to handle. I think otherwise what it does, it creates anxiety, because you feel a bit low on motivation. So all of a sudden you think, oh, I shouldn't be, unmotivated. I should be, and that drives anxiety and can exacerbate the problem. So I think acceptance is the first thing. And I think the second thing, when you talk about commitment, I think actually the way I look at it is it's a triumvirate. And that is that often people say to me, oh, you must be really motivated. Well, look, motivation is not innate. It's not there. It's not out in the ether and, you are motivated or you're not motivated. What we do is we create motivation. And I think the first place that we start with when it comes to, if you're going to start a long shift on a particular day, the first thing is about belief. And that belief has to be that you're going to get through today, that you're going to have a good day, and that you are going to make a difference. So I believe that I'm going to do that. And if I believe that, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit the resources to make sure that I achieve that. I'm going to commit the effort, the time, etc., into making sure that I deliver that. With that commitment comes success, because actually, and it's not about 100% success, but there's more success than there is failure. And with that success, what happens is that you start to believe more, because you are starting to create success. And what that drives motivation. So what we do is we create motivation by the structure within which we operate. Once we believe, we commit, we deliver that plan, we create success, and then motivation follows that. And then it becomes self-fulfilling as we go through. And that's really the key, I think, is just we create motivation. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah. And I tell you where my mind went in terms of the NHS was the motivation and commitment can come or be accelerated when you reflect on how far you've come. So we're always in the dogfight right now. But if you think where we were 12 months ago, where we knew nothing about this horrid, this horrid disease, this horrid pandemic, but how hard they fought then in the first few months, with almost blind to a certain degree, and now how far they've advanced, through the science, engagement, best practice, sharing, learning, communication, all the great things that go into an amazing team.
Absolutely right. Do you know, and again, the analogy when it comes down to a big challenge, a big physical challenge, is that you only truly appreciate what you've achieved when it's over. And it's quite a difficult thing to do. It's wonderful with hindsight to look back and think, wow, wasn't that incredible? To some extent, it's what always drives me to go back to big physical challenges, as brutal as they are throughout them. And through those really dark periods, which are inevitable when you're inside a very big challenge. And it is only generally some time after, and it can be quite considerable period of time after you finish the challenge, that you can really reflect and look at how successful it was. And that's because I think what you're doing is you're looking at the whole elephant, to take your elephant analogy, is because you're looking at the whole thing. Whereas I think critically, when you're inside the challenge, and I do this with all the guys that I work with on challenges, is just dissect it down into those short-term goals. And what that will do is that will deliver the success and the motivation that you're looking for within the challenge. And then at the same time, when you reflect on it in some time in the future, the achievement will actually be sweeter, because what you've done is you've taken the opportunity to reflect on your success throughout the challenge itself.
When you've been in your challenges, granted a lot of them are physical and psychological endurance events, but they do map across to the marathon that the NHS are doing right now, and it's a huge marathon, let's be honest. How do you recharge yourself? How do you unwind? Because you're going from doing 12, 16, 18 hours a day activities, maybe getting a couple of hours sleep. Have you got a process where it allows you to switch off?
Well, I think the most underrated aspect of our lives is recovery. It's the one thing that we place the least importance on, and it's the one thing that we do least well. And I think what I've learned, from as an Olympian, as a young man, through to now doing ultra endurance as an old man, is that the one thing that I have learned is that recovery, how the importance of recovery. I think when you are young, you do bounce back, you do adapt and mold much more easily than you do when you get older. But I think the key to that then is to what you're trying to do is you're trying to operate 100%. What you don't want to do is dial that down to 80% so you can survive through it. So you've got to keep the performance going at the optimal level. And really the only way to do that is to optimize the recovery. In a big physical challenge sporting analogy, then it comes down to things like nutrition. It's about rest, it's about sleep, it's about hydration. And I think the interesting thing is that there is a direct analogy with the workplace, because actually in the workplace is the one thing that we take less heed of and focus less attention on is what the structure of our recovery. And for example, for things like sleep, it is, I'm a busy guy, I've got 3 children, there's lots going on, and sleep is at a premium. But the key to sleep is about quality. It's about sleep quality, not just solely about duration. And of course, there are things that we can do to make sure that we improve our sleep quality with our sleep hygiene, what we do before we go to bed, what we do while we're in bed. So things like electronics, etc. The sleep environment itself, it should be dark, it should be cool, we should have the right pillow, etc. All of those things that I think if we pay the right attention to them and give them the right level of importance that they deserve, what that means is that we recover better. And so therefore, directly, without working any harder, we improve our performance. And so it's just about looking holistically at our performance and making sure that every aspect, that lovely term we call leave no stone unturned, but it's about looking at every aspect of performance and optimizing each of those to make sure that, when we come to work, that we are absolutely in the right position to provide 100% best performance.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually used the term with some of our NHS clients of think like a professional athlete, because when they're on the front line, especially at the moment, they're so busy of, they're turning up arguably not at breakfast. They're straight into it because their drive to do their job and to help that patient out is so strong that, you know, if they take 10 minutes to go and get some food or a drink or whatever, then obviously it's playing on their mind, guilt kicks in. And then, you know, they'll bounce from patient to patient to patient. And the next thing you know, they've been there for 6 hours and they haven't even been to the toilet or a drink because their drive to perform is so high.
Yeah.
But it's not sustainable. That's what we were talking about, is having sustainable energy, sustainable mindset. And it doesn't mean, you know, like in the olden days, you could nip down the cafe and have a half-hour lunch break, you know, if things are playing on your mind. But 5 minutes to have a sandwich or whatever it is so important to ensure that you can provide the best possible service. And the reason for that is, if we're not looking after ourselves and recovering, we're increasing our chances of making the wrong decision, aren't we?
Well, I mean, you point to exactly what I was about to come on to. That is, you know, there's an acute effect and there's a chronic effect. But the acute effect is actually on performance, and that is cognitive performance. It's decision making. You know, if you are dehydrated and undernourished with sleep deprived, I can tell you I've seen it and I've done it on far too many occasions, is that you make wrong decisions. And that's the point. So actually, this idea that it's either or is that, you know, I've got something to do, and I should bypass everything else in order to do that is almost erroneous, because what it does is, by bypassing the things that we should be doing, it will directly impact upon our performance in the things that we are doing. So I think, you know, things like, you know, I mean, dehydration is some lovely data where we show dehydration. Interestingly enough, now in the NHS with PPE, already in an air-conditioned environment, with high flow rates, you know, what is it, up to 36 liters per second per person in COVID wards, you dehydrate very, very rapidly. And because of that, what we should be really thinking about is making sure that we optimize our hydrations, because dehydration leads to cognitive dysfunction. So, you know, I think sometimes it does feel like it's you know, elite performance is a different place, but it's not. There's a whole host of things. I mean, I was 6 years as director of research at the British Olympic Medical Centre. So I looked after the prep of 5 Olympic teams. And I then went up to set up my clinic on Harley Street. And like I said, what we did is we took what we knew from elite performance in terms of health and performance, and we translated that into the general population. And so work that I'm just publishing currently is actually in cancer patients. But, you know, we've worked in cardiac, pulmonary, if just about every sphere, in fact, looking at the role of human performance, with obviously my area of expertise, that being physical activity, exercise, but also in areas like nutrition, hydration, etc. And we know that there's a real crossover of what we do in elite performance into general life. Much like it is the design of car parts for Formula One, eventually filter down into what you put, you know, what you park on your driveway. It's exactly the same when it comes to human performance.
Yeah, and you know, these guys are, you know, working in the NHS the last 12 months, they are elite performers, and I think when you're thinking and behaving like that, life does become a little better, because, you know, there's not many that I know are, you know, looking at electrolyte style drinks, for example, because the amount of fluid they're now losing because of the PP, as you mentioned, where, you know, as an athlete, when they know that they're going to exercise, the first thing they do is preparing their drinks to go to it, don't they? So little things like that can be massively help.
Yeah.
Greg, I'm conscious of time. It's just gone 1:45, and we've got a load of questions coming in.
Okay, great.
We'll recap one because there was a few late joiners. So Rob Cooper sent one in and said, we've sort of touched on it, but if we can give it the fine answer. So given that many of the staff you'll be talking to this evening will be working long hours across 7 days, what tips have you got with regard to motivating yourself to exercise? And are there any simple programs available that people can follow?
Okay, so just to reiterate that, think about outcome rather than process. Think about how great you'll feel when you've done some physical activity, rather than thinking about the getting ready to do some physical activity. Number one. Number two, share it obviously within your bubble, within your household. If you can be physically active with other people, it becomes a social experience as well. Invariably, on those moments when you don't want to do it, the person that you're with will want to do it. And also it gives you an opportunity to connect with people away from normal environments, you know, with the television on or the radio on or whatever you're doing. So just make it a social event. Think about outcome rather than process. What was the second part of that question?
Any simple programs available, sort of?
You know, there's so many great programs. I mean, interesting enough, we're just about to launch my new platform. But I mean, certainly what we've learned now is that the online there's a plethora of online providers, and who cover all sorts of areas, from yoga and Pilates all the way through to high intensity interval training. For me, much like it is with anything in life, it's actually about what works for you. And I think don't, just because lots of people are watching Joe Wicks, he's a good friend of mine. He might not work for you, find something that works for you, find a program that works for you. And equally, they're very simple ones. I mean, the NHS has some great programs. You can find them online. The Couch to 5K is a fabulous program for anybody who wants to try and get into a little bit of running. It's a run-walk program that eventually ends up at 5 kilometer running. But I think the most important thing I would say is make sure that whatever you're thinking about doing, make sure that you enjoy it. I think invariably people feel pushed into areas. I can't tell you how many clients I've had who've said to me, I want to run the London Marathon. And I say to them, do you like marathon? Do you like running? And they say, no, I absolutely hate it. They're like, well, why are you doing it? So I think, find what works for you. There's so much out there online, inside the NHS, and just make sure that when you do it, enjoy it. And remember, variety is the spice of life. If you start to fall out of love with it, change it up and do something different.
Yeah, and I think motivation does play a part there, because some people are motivated by doing similar things. Routine plays a big part, and other people are motivated by doing variety of things.
Sure.
And understanding what motivates you. So a lot of the guys I work with might do a week to week program, because they don't want to know what's coming. Others want to know a 6-month program because I need to know and plan my life. And everyone's different, aren't they? So that can help.
Absolutely right.
Elizabeth's asking a little bit more about electrolytes. So do you think there'll be any benefit to these guys, maybe thinking about using electrolyte drinks or even protein shakes at work versus water?
Well, I think definitely. I mean, what you're talking about is effectively you're talking about gastric emptying. So it's the uptake at the gut which makes a difference. I mean, and many of the guys on this call who are working in the NHS will do this with patients. I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to optimize hydration, which is not necessarily just what you put in your mouth. It's actually about the biologic availability, the uptake of that at the gut. What we do know is that by adding electrolytes in the right quantities, and interestingly adding carbohydrates, adding glucose or fructose or a combination of both, what they do is that they increase the speed of uptake at the gut. Too much electrolytes, much like too much carbohydrate, can have deleterious effects, negative effects on the gut, and can cause things like nausea and worse. So get it right. But you know what? There are so many products out there off the shelf that you can use. Some are electrolyte only, some are electrolyte and carbohydrate. I don't suggest extensive or excessive carbohydrate ingestion, but without any shadow of doubt, electrolytes would help. Equally, the way I always describe it is that if you want a little and often, so don't think to yourself that I need to drink a liter in the first 30 minutes. Spread it out across the day. What we do get is an awful lot of what we call insensible sweat loss. So through the respiratory tract, particularly in air-conditioned environments, we actually get airway drying, and we get loss of fluid through the respiratory tract. So there is a value to comfort of this as well, of fluid ingestion. And I think also just make sure what electrolytes can give is palatability. Plain water is not always that exciting. And because if it's not exciting, that means you don't drink it. And so therefore it exacerbates the problem with dehydration. Everybody on this call will understand that with patients who simply just don't drink enough fluid. But yeah, I think electrolytes would be of value. Protein shakes, something different, really. What I would always be very careful of is this idea of replacement, is that there is nothing that is as good as a healthy, balanced diet. And I don't think what you should be doing is looking for shortcuts through that. But equally, in very busy shifts, very heavy shifts, late finishes, early starts, sometimes supplements to that nutrition can be valuable.
Yeah, I talk a lot about listening to your body, and I think that you probably had this, Greg. When you have an electrolyte drink and you think you need it because you've sweated a lot, your body will say, "This is exactly what I need because it tastes amazing." It's just like, yes, this is exactly what I need, and it's going to do its job. That's for sure. Okie dokie. A few more questions coming in then. So let's go back to leadership on this one, Greg. What advice would you give to someone who has recently started a new leadership role? Specifically, how do you prevent yourself from being too negative on your own performance?
You know, I mean, it's easy to criticize yourself. I think criticism to some extent can be incredibly valuable as long as it's constructive criticism. I think, you know, it's a difficult one to answer in a generic fashion. But I think, you know, as a new leader, I think to my mind, I think what you need to do is create markers. You know, what is it that you are looking to achieve, and create measurable markers on that achievement with you and your team. And I think that what that does is what it'll do is it'll inform you in terms of which direction it's going. It enables you to identify when things are going well, and so therefore what you can do is you can double down on those and focus on some of those aspects of it. But equally, what it does, it enables you to highlight issues and problems early so that you can actually make changes. But I think you can only do that by actually having key set goals or markers in the sand that you are measuring yourself against. So I think as a new leader, it's probably more important because it takes a time to get that experience and that feel for how it's going. And I think also communication with the team, you know, get a feel from the team how it's going. You know, feedback, you have to be very careful. I think what you want is you want constructive feedback that you can use, that you can actually develop and grow from. I don't think what you don't want is just a carte blanche of complaints and moaning for things that are out with your control. But certainly speaking to your team and making sure that, you know, it brings us back to that empathy piece. Actually communicating effectively with the team becomes really, really important, particularly for new leaders.
Yeah, definitely. My top tips, I think, would be to be realistic, you know, in terms of your impact immediately. I think invest some time in yourself as well. I think there's so many things that we can learn from other people's stories. I'm a big fan of books. I wasn't massively academic, but, you know, I love reading some of the books around leadership now and concepts, because they give you 40, 50 anecdotal stories of what's good and what's bad from other people's mistakes. It's a great way of learning. I'd say reach out to your organizational development or your leadership and development team, because without a doubt, they'll have some programs going on. If they haven't, they've probably partnered up, or they'll be able to introduce you to other trusts, neighboring trusts, which will have slots for you on maybe a leadership course, for example. But getting out there and being proactive and finding out where the development opportunities are. They don't always come knocking your door down. Sometimes you've got to go out and create them, that's for sure. Yeah. So that's one from me. There's one of our celebrities, which we're going to come on to last. I think everybody.
Oh, yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah. We've had some answers from the audience in terms of, you know, lockdown fatigue, along with obviously the cold, wintry weather. Yeah. What could we be specifically telling ourselves to get through the rest of winter and these restrictions?
Well, I think, you know, fundamentally having a positive outlook on the fact that we are going to get out of this. I think often what we do is we start to question our belief of if we get out of this, or can we get out of this. I think, you know, start from going back to our positive self-talk. We will get out of this. It's as simple as that. We will get out of this. There will be an end to it. And so what we've got to try and do is make that journey to exit as bearable or enjoyable, if we want to use that term, as possible. And I think, you know, that's really the key to it. And I think, to my mind, I think it's about structure, really. You know, what everyone on the call has got purpose. You know, they get up in the morning and they've got an absolute purpose because of the incredible work that they do inside the NHS. But I think it is about having structure around the whole of life, not just around the work life. So you know what time you're going to work, you know what time you're coming home from work, you know when your lunch break is, or whatever that is. But actually, I think what you should do is structure around the rest of your life. You know, what are you going to do on those days that you have off? If that's the weekend, what are you doing the weekend? What are you going to do with the family? What are we trying to achieve? And so it's that structure and planning to all aspects of life. And then making sure that you deliver to each of those, because what happens is that they all come together. So they all contribute to the same well-being, your own personal well-being, your family's well-being, and then the end of that is your patient's well-being, because everybody profits when you are performing well. So I think it is that. Don't I guess to some extent, don't leave it to chance. Make sure that you've got a plan in place that to optimize your performance throughout the week in all aspects of your life. And I think if you do that, you'll be much more productive.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the old Stoic quotes, come out, this too shall pass, is a classic one, but what and when we don't know, but we'll definitely get there. And I think as well, sometimes we talk around, we've got to become a little bit unnatural in terms of responding. So our natural response is to be negative, and it is to, feel a bit drum beaten and thinking, oh, we're never going to get out of this, rather than, well, what if it was this? What if it was that? What else can we do? What can we do today? What can we do this weekend? What can we do on my next day off? And I think that approach will always create those smaller goals, and then actually time passes quicker. Nobody's holiday's ever gone slow. Have you noticed? It's because we do so much, same as nobody's ever regretted a workout, have they?
No, absolutely not.
Unless you had a brutal PT that actually drove you into the wall. But there we go.
Unless you've done a challenge with me.
Right, last question. And it's actually different about celebrities. We normally get the opposite question. The question is, I'll play both of them to you. It says, any celebrity stand out as easier to work with and why? We normally get, who's the biggest pain in the backside, and what inside story can you tell us? So who's the easy ones? Who's the good one? I suppose by default, you tell us not.
Well, I think the one thing I would always say on this question, however it's coined, is the fact that these guys, particularly the guys that I have worked with, they don't need any more coverage. They don't need to be on television. They don't need somebody to be talking about them, because they are just constantly being talked about anyway. So because of that, I think what you always have to remind yourself is the fact that they are giving up a huge amount of time, because these challenges it's just not the 5 day of the challenge. It is the 6 months of training it takes to get to that challenge. They're giving up a huge amount of time, a huge amount of effort. And I think crucially, and the one thing that I'm always respectful of, is the fact that they are putting their reputation and their public face on the line for this. I've worked on 32 sport relief, comet relief challenges, for example, and I'm touching wood as I speak, but there was 32 successes. We didn't have a single failure. No celebrity wants to be the first person to fail. Let me tell you that. Nobody. And so actually it became more difficult as time went on. It became more difficult to actually get celebrities to engage, because of that. But I think because of that, very, very rarely, and I can honestly, hand on heart, say never have I worked with somebody who it wasn't a pleasure to work with. That's not to say that some weren't more difficult than others, but it was on the good end of the scale. I mean, some are absolutely bought in 100% up for it, completely in for it, and whatever I tell them to do, they do. Others take a little bit more coercion. But to be honest with you, the great ones are always the solo challenges. I've done solo and team challenges. The solo ones, Davina McCall, absolutely brilliant. Talking about where we're talking to the team now in the Northwest, one of the best projects I ever did was with Jo Brand. What an incredible woman who really did put herself on the line, because she was pretty much inactive before we started the challenge, and we walked from Hull to Liverpool, 140 miles. 20 miles a day over 7 days, which was no mean feat in February. It was brutal, the conditions were, and I think they're wonderful. David Williams is a very close friend of mine, did an incredible job on the channel. We also swam across the Gibraltar Straits. We did the £1 million cycle from John O'Groats to Land's End. John Bishop was, you know what, honestly, they're all fantastic, to be honest with you. There were very few hiccups along the way, and I think that's because those celebrities who would have been difficult simply wouldn't put themselves up for a challenge.
No, they definitely wouldn't. And the last thing I read, Greg, I think it's over £40 million now that you've been involved with comic relief. So, on behalf of everybody on the call, please keep up the great work too. I know we're here to send a strong message to the guys, on the front line in the NHS, but please, let's replay that back to you and keep up the great work, because it's all about this sort of community, isn't it? And everybody pulling to do the right thing at the right time when we can.
Well, listen, I think, Captain Sir Tom demonstrated that this year, about how, and I think, for everybody on the call, how loved the NHS is, and the people who work within the NHS are. I think we point our finger towards Captain Sir Tom, but actually the money was given for the NHS, and that's the regard that the NHS is held in this country. And I think that the job that the people on this call, the entire NHS do, is truly exemplary. And is the shining light of what Britain is about and the people that live in this country. So, my thanks would go to them.
Yeah, and a big thanks from us as well. And what a great way to wrap up. Greg, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for your engagement, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed it. It's been a fantastic opportunity to come and have a chat with you tonight, maybe take your mind away from other things. I hope you had a nice cup of tea and a chinwag with us. Me and Greg could chat all night. We could be here till midnight. So from everybody at St. Helens NHS Trust, Greg, thanks so much for your time. It's much appreciated. Guys, if anybody of your colleagues sort of missed this, then keep an eye out over the next week or two that this will be uploaded onto YouTube's and shared on your intranet and that. So if you think it's worthwhile, or if you want to revisit some of the pointers there, please revisit us. As I said at the start, if you're not aware, we've also got Beth Tweddle on tomorrow talking about performing under pressure. We've got Royal Marine Andy on Thursday with an inspirational story. And on Friday, we've got Locksmith coming in from Rudimental, which is going to be phenomenal. And the consistency in terms of the style, hopefully it's been chilled for you and relaxed. That's definitely the only way I am. I'm very informal. I hope you enjoyed it, and take care, and thanks for everything you're doing. Really appreciate it.